The Smoker. A boy lived in the woods, and his father told him never to go eastward, but to play in the clearing by their hut, or to walk towards the west. For some years the boy obeyed his father, but as he grew older, and the paths of the west became dusty with use, he felt himself drawn to the unknown trees and the green trackways, and one day he set off towards the east. He found a lake and knelt down to drink, but the water was alive with savage fish, and he nearly lost a hand. He crouched by the shore and watched the fins swirl the water, and a stranger came up behind him, so softly that the boy knew nothing until the man spoke. "Let us see who can throw a spear the farthest." "Very well," said the boy, and he won easily. "Let us run around the lake," said the man. "I agree," said the boy, and he won that too. "Let me show you the island in the middle of the lake," said the man. "Do you like fish?" said the boy. "I can see the island from here." The man whistled, and a boat came into sight, drawn by 3 flying swans. The man and the boy stepped into the boat and were carried to the island. But as soon as they landed, the boy wished that he had stayed at home, for the man knocked him down and left him, and went back across the lake. The boy felt his bruises. Nothing was broken, although he ached from the fists. He limped about the island to find food, but there was little except berries and roots, and no shelter. He sat and watched the night come. "If you would be good enough to dig an inch or so into the earth," said a voice close by him, "you would do me a great kindness." The boy was startled, for there was no one to be seen. "I'm in the leaf mold," said the voice. The boy scraped the last year's autumn, and underneath he found a skeleton lying yellow on the ground. "I am much obliged," said the skeleton. "Now one more thing, if you will. Under that tree just by the bowl, there's a pouch buried. Would you bring it to me?" The boy put his hand down by the bowl and found a tobacco pouch in the soil, and a pipe and flint. "It would gratify me," said the skeleton, "if you would light the pipe and put it in my mouth." The boy did so, and held the pipe between the skeleton's teeth. "Ah, thank you," said the skeleton. "It's the mice, you see. They nest in my ribs, and only the smoke will move them. Such a torment they are, and such a blessing this is." The boy sat without moving until the skeleton had finished the pipe. "Now," said the skeleton, "you will want to know what you can do about the man who brought you here. Well, I'll help you. He's on his way now with dogs to hunt you for sport. So you must run up and down all over the island, leaving tracks, and be sure to touch every tree. Then when he comes, hide at the top of a tree, and they will never find you." And that is what the boy did. And the dogs could not find him, for his scent was everywhere. At dawn the man took them off and went back to the land. "He will come at night," said the skeleton, "and it will be to drink your blood. But you must dig a hole in the sand near where the boat is beached, and wait for him to start looking for you." All that day the boy held the pipe for the skeleton. "And remember," said the skeleton, Don't return for a year. Then, if you will bring me a little tobacco, perhaps, it would be most beneficial. Indeed it would." The boy hid in the sand until the man had disappeared among the trees, and then he ran to the boat and jumped in. As soon as they felt the movement, the swans flew back to the land, taking boat and boy with them safely among the deadly fish. And the boy went home and stayed westwards for a year. At the end of the year, he made his way to the lake again. The swans were waiting. The island was unchanged. "I've brought a new pipe and pouches of tobacco," said the boy. "You are more than considerate," said the skeleton. "The nesting season has been a great burden." The boy lit the pipe, and the mice were soon cleared. "Can I do anything more to help you?" said the boy. "You saved my life. Shall I bury you?" "No," said the skeleton. "I would rather know the sun and the rain, the wind and the moon, and let them do their work. It's pleasanter here than in the dark." So the boy built a hut on the lake shore, and each day he came with the swans to light the skeleton's pipe and to keep him company, until the sun and the rain, the wind and the moon had done their work, and nothing remained to tempt the busy mice. Prayer. Grant that no hobgoblins fright me, no hungry devils rise up and bite me, no urchins, elves, or drunkards, ghosts shove me against walls or posts. O grant I may no black thing touch, though many men love to meet such. To become a werewolf. Ingredients: chalk or string, 1 iron vessel, 1 iron tripod, any 3 of the following: asafoetida, parsley, opium, henbane, saffron, aloe, poppy seed, or solanum, 1 freshly killed cat, aniseed, camphor, opium, 1 wolfskin girdle. Preparation. Go to a solitary place at midnight, when the moon is new and strong, preferably a desert, the woods, or a mountaintop. On perfectly level ground, mark off with the chalk or string a circle with a radius of at least 7 feet, and inside this a circle with a radius of 3 feet. In the center, boil water in an iron vessel on the iron tripod. As the water boils, throw in handfuls of the 3 spices, meanwhile intoning, "Spirits from the deep who never sleep, be kind to me. Spirits from the grave without a soul to save, be kind to me. Spirits of the trees that grow upon the leas, be kind to me. Spirits of the air, foul and black, not fair, be kind to me. Water spirits hateful to ships and bathers fateful, be kind to me. Spirits of earth-bound dead that glide with noiseless tread, be kind to me. Spirits of heat and fire destructive in your ire, be kind to me. Spirits of cold and ice, patrons of crime and vice, be kind to me. Wolves, vampires, satyrs, ghosts, elect of all the devilish hosts, I pray you send hither, send hither, send hither the great grey shape that makes men shiver, shiver, shiver. Come, come, come. Removing your upper garments, smear your body with the fat of the freshly killed cat, mixed with aniseed, camphor, and opium. Bind your loins with the wolf's skin, and kneel down within the middle of the smaller circle to await the unknown. The unknown will appear, or make its presence felt, when the fire burns blue and quickly dies out. To raise the dead. Ingredients: spermaceti, lignum aloes, pepperwort, musk, saffron, red storage, blood of a lapwing. Preparation: compound the above items and fumigate them about tombs or graves of the dead. It will cause spirits and ghosts of the dead to gather together. The witches reel. This is the song that the North Berwick witches sang as they danced. Cummer was a Scottish word for addressing a woman, particularly a witch. Cummer go ye before, cummer go ye. If ye willna go before, cummer let me ring wi' the shins, linkin lithely wi' the shins. Cummer calling crone and queen, round we go. Cummer go ye before, cummer go ye. If ye willna go before, cummer let me ring wi' the shins, looping lightly wi' the shins. Kilted coats and fleeing hair, 3 times 3. Cummer go ye before, cummer go ye. If ye willna go before, cummer let me ring wi' the shins, whirling skirling wi' the shins, and they'll take the hindermost, whoe'er she be. The Broomstick Train by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Look out, boys, clear the track. The witches are here, they've all come back. They hanged them high, no use, no use. What cares a witch for the hangman's noose? They buried them deep, but they wouldn't lie still, for cats and witches are hard to kill. They swore they shouldn't and wouldn't die. Books said they did, but they lie. They lie. Sweden. We of the province of Elfdale do confess that we used to go to a gravel pit, which lays hard by a crossway, and there we put on a vest over our heads and then danced round, and after this ran to the crossway and called the devil thrice, first in a still voice, the second time somewhat louder, and the third time very loud with these words, "Antecessor, come and carry us to Blockala." Whereupon immediately he used to appear, but in different habits, but for the most part we saw him in a grey coat and red and blue stockings. He had a red beard, a high-crowned hat, with linen of divers colors wrapped about it, and long garters upon his stockings. Then he asked us whether we would serve him with body and soul. If we were content to do so, he set us upon a beast, which he had there already, and carried us over churches and high walls, and after all we came to a green meadow where Blockala lies. They unanimously confess that Blockula is situated in a large meadow, like a plain sea, wherein you see no end. The place or house they met at had before it a great gate, painted with many divers colors on it. Through this gate they went into a little meadow distant from the other where the beasts went, which they used to ride on. In a huge, large room of the house, they said, there stood a very large, long table, at which the witches did sit down, and that hard by this room was another chamber, where there were some lovely and delicate beds. The first thing they said they must do at Blockala was that they must deny all and devote themselves body and soul to the devil, and promise to serve him faithfully, and confirm it with an oath. Hereupon they cut their fingers and writ their names in his book. After this they sat down to table, and those that the devil esteemed most were placed nearest to him, but the children must stand at the door, where he himself gives them meat and drink. The Phantom Merry-Go-Round. Among the pirate islands at the outer edge of Barataria Bay, the westernmost is Ile Dernière, now generally known as Last Island. For a little while it was the capital of the illegitimate empire of Jean Lafitte, the famous buccaneer who later moved to Grande Terre and became a picturesque hero at the Battle of New Orleans. Not long after the pirates had scattered, Last Island became a summer resort. Some of the most distinguished of New Orleans Creole families built luxurious cottages there. An enterprising merchant erected an elaborate hotel called the Tradewind, which was decorated by many towers and bordered by pillared galleries. A whole wing of this long and spacious building was devoted to a ballroom, where an orchestra played nightly, and all the families from the cottages joined the hotel guests to dance the hours of darkness away. The season was at its height at the beginning of August in 1856. The summer residents congratulated each other that their island was cool, while the heat of New Orleans was almost intolerable. A strong north wind was blowing, and high waves raced in from the Gulf of Mexico to break in thundering surf upon the sand. Each day was bright and clear. On the 9th of the month came the first ominous evidences of possible disaster. Great dark clouds towered on the horizon, and the wind brought with it a roaring sound. Darkness came early that afternoon, and the sound increased. The islanders gathered at the ballroom, glad to divert themselves by dancing and forgetting the fears that stirred in their minds. Nervously, the ladies, in their formal gowns, looked out of the windows at the advancing waves, but soon the music and the gay rhythms of the dance captured their complete attention. When the gaiety was at its height, came a piercing scream. A girl had seen water spurt under the door of the ballroom and darken the shining floor. As some of the gentlemen raced toward the door, it burst from its hinges, and a resistless wave swept through the room. The struggling dancers heard a terrific crash, and the roof of the ballroom had blown away. Wave after wave followed, and the helpless humans, screaming and panic-stricken, were scattered by the seething waters. Those who fought their way out of the hotel saw whole cottages swept away from their foundations and bobbing crazily about. A small steamboat, the Star, had been snatched from her moorings and was blown up upon the island. It filled with water and sank on the site of a billiard parlor which had disappeared. A few of the victims of the storm fought their way to her hull and clung there throughout the night. Not far from the hotel stood a children's whirligig or merry-go-round. A group of men and women had fought their way to it, and they clung to the wooden rail above their heads. The wind increased its force and set the rail to circling. The terrified passengers kept desperate hold, their bodies hanging grotesquely as the rail went round. When the waters receded next morning, about 2/3 of the people on the island had lost their lives. Many were never found. But here and there on the wet sands lay corpses in odd, stiff attitudes. Almost a century has passed since this great tragedy, but the fishermen of Barataria Bay say that even today, when chugging past Last Island in their little boats, sometimes on blowy nights, They see on its shores a vast hotel, its windows gleaming with light, and they hear dance music above the whistle of the wind. Sometimes, too, a boat crew reports that they have beheld by the light of the windows dark shadows moving slowly in circular parade, like human bodies riding a gruesome merry-go-round. A pair of gloves. On the day that Elizabeth, younger daughter of the Roderick MacLeods, reached the age of 16, her parents decided that she should be sent to the same exclusive school in Switzerland which had so successfully educated her elder sister Flora. Grandfather MacLeod offered only a minor amendment to this program. Before she matriculated, he wished her to visit her cousins, residing at the seat of the MacLeod, Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye. When Elizabeth first saw the home of her ancestors, there was a sheen on the calm waters about it, while a soft mist resting above raggedly embraced its crenellated towers. Soon the crew of the small boat that brought her from the mainland lowered the sail. They sang an old Hebridean song as they rowed her to the little dock where the MacLeod waited. He was a tall, bearded man, and his welcome, gruff and impassive, embarrassed her, though she felt he was glad to see her. His sister, also tall and reserved, stood beside him and bowed graciously. She was distressed, she said, that there were no young people at Dunvegan at this time. She had invited several of the MacLeod nephews and nieces, but all had already returned to their schools or were busy preparing to do so. Elizabeth found the grey castle fascinating. Its electric lights only gave emphasis to the age of its big dark rooms, and seemed the one compromise that its residents had been willing to make with modern times. She and her newfound relatives sat long over their after-dinner coffee that evening, while the MacLeod told her of bonny Prince Charlie's escape to the Isle of Skye and his stay at Dunvegan, of the later visit of Dr. Samuel Johnson and his inevitable companion James Boswell. Later, Elizabeth lay in an enormous old bed, studying Scottish chiefs by the light of a tiny reading lamp affixed to the headboard. She did not know when she first became aware of other light in the room. It seemed to have been there, and very naturally, for some time before she considered its presence. At the foot of the bed, in a circle of radiance, lay a pair of man-sized gauntlet gloves. On the wide cuffs, embroidered in red, she could see the outline of an intricate design. She looked up from the gloves and saw, standing beside the bed in the half-light, a tall, dark young man who was smiling at her. She did not remember his features later. She only recalled that his teeth gleamed white and regular, and that his eyes were bright with what seemed to be a friendly and curious interest. None of his dark costume was clearly visible, except white lace cuffs that fell from the ends of his jacket sleeves halfway over his long, slim hands. Thinking that her companion might be one of the MacLeod's nephews whose absence had been lamented earlier in the day, Elizabeth turned the button of an electric lamp on her bedside table. The room flooded with light, and the gloves and the young man were gone. Elizabeth had none of the fear that she might have been expected to feel under the circumstances. She reasoned that she must have fallen asleep and dreamed the two apparitions, and she decided she would not trouble her host by speaking of them. She slept soundly, and her only recognition of what had happened found expression in a letter to her sister. In this she described to Flora the event of the previous night, though at the same time she ridiculed giving it any credence. She was the more out of patience with herself a week later, when she said goodbye to the MacLeod and his sister, for she had not seen the young man or the gloves again, nor had she heard anything during her stay that might even partially explain her experience. Elizabeth's memory of her visit to Dunvegan was very dim 7 years later. She had spent 2 years at the Swiss school and then come back to New York. There she had met and married Kenneth Warren, a charming and reasonably well-to-do young Virginian. Unlike most Southerners, her husband claimed few kinfolk. His only close relative, he told the McLeods, was an elderly maiden aunt who lived in an old brick house in Dinwiddie County and was too frail to come north for the ceremony. The marriage proved a very happy one. For 4 years the couple lived in a pleasant New York house on Murray Hill. Then, on an April afternoon, Kenneth Warren came home looking troubled. "My aunt died and was buried nearly 2 weeks ago," he said. "The information has just reached me, for there was some trouble in finding our address. We have inherited the house and must drive down at once to sell it and settle the estate." Elizabeth loved the dilapidated brick pile from the moment Kenneth drove her up the long drive. Though it was far from any neighbor and in such condition that she found difficulty in believing that it had been recently lived in, it satisfied a longing within her for just this kind of home. "We must keep it," she told her husband delightedly. "Perhaps we can restore only one room at a time, but it will be worth doing. Please say we keep it." Kenneth agreed, but without enthusiasm. "I'm used to it," he said. It doesn't mean as much to me as it does to you." He went out for a walk in the spring twilight, leaving Elizabeth very busy at her rummaging. When he came back, she had prepared a supper from food they had brought with them, and had set it on the dining-room table. She had found candles in the kitchen, and now, set in a half-dozen candlesticks, they made a soft light that was grotesquely broken here and there by black shadows. "Darling," said Elizabeth eagerly as soon as they were seated, "I've had such an exciting time. It reminded me of something I dreamed when I was a schoolgirl visiting relatives abroad. I was prowling through the attic this afternoon and opened an old chest full of laces and dress materials. At the bottom was this pair of gauntlet gloves with red markings. Do tell me what you know about them. Do you suppose—" But at sight of the gloves, Kenneth Warren, death-pale, rose from the table. In 3 long strides he was at the door. There he turned to Elizabeth and spoke in a trembling voice. "So you were the girl in the bed." Before she could grasp the meaning of these words, he was gone. So far as anyone knows, no human has seen him since that moment. Elizabeth searched for him frantically all night, and in the morning she summoned neighbors to her aid. They looked at her dubiously as she told her story. When she finished it, they shook their heads. No old lady nor anyone else had lived in that house, they said. Not in the last 100 years, anyway. They made a careful search for Kenneth. They found in the soft ground outside the doorway a man's footprints leading away from the drive to the center of the open space that had once been the lawn of the old house. There they stopped. 10 years have passed, and Elizabeth has found no trace of her husband. She still has the gloves. Gobbleknoll. There was a hill that ate people. The rabbit's grandmother told him never to go near it. So the rabbit went to the hill and shouted, "Gobbleknoll, swallow me! Come, devour me!" But Gobbleknoll knew the rabbit and took no notice. Later that day, a group of travelers came by, looking for a place to shelter from the rain, and Gobbleknoll opened his green and ferny lips, and the travelers thought that they had found a cave. They went in, and the rabbit slipped close behind them. But the hill felt hairy pads on his tunnels, and before the rabbit could reach the middle, Gobbleknoll threw him out, and the grass shut. The rabbit went and hid behind a tree, and a few days later a hunting party arrived at the hill just before night, and Gobbleknoll opened again. This time the rabbit used magic art and took the shape of a man, except for his ears, which he tucked down his shirt, so that they would not brush against the roof and make Gobbleknoll sneeze. He went down long and horrid passages until he came to the hill's stomach, and there were the remains of all the victims, and some who were not yet dead. "Hey, hey, hey!" shouted the rabbit. "Why don't you eat? You leave the best. Here's a delicious heart. What's wrong with that?" Gobbleknoll set up a dismal howling, for it was his own heart that the rabbit had seen, and the rabbit knew this and took out a knife and stabbed the hill dead. The ground split, and the blue sky lit the deep hollows, and the living came out and wept before the rabbit, and wanted to give him power and riches. But all the rabbit would take was Gobbleknoll's fat, and he went home with it on his back, and he and his grandmother were fit to burst from it for many a day. The Lone Grave. On the sloping lawn of a children's playground in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, stand strange reminders of an earlier day. One of these is an octagonal spring house where, more than 100 years ago, aristocratic Southern gentlemen and ladies gathered to take the waters, which were guaranteed to be beneficial to the general health. The other, only a few yards away, is a grave now surrounded by a white picket fence. A white marker beside it reads, "Unknown. Hallowed and hushed be the place of the dead. Step softly, bow head." When the body of the beautiful girl who lies here was lowered into the ground, the impressive funeral ceremonies took place against the background of an entrance to an enormous inn. 8 white pillars rose from the floor of its veranda to carved capitals beneath its roof. This was Harrodsburg Springs Hotel in the Saratoga of the South, gayest of all Kentucky resorts. To it came the proudest and richest of Southern families, the Breckinridges, the Morgans, the Rowans, the Poignards, the Buchanans. The great Senator Henry Clay was an occasional visitor, and once the hearts of Southern belles and their mammas beat faster for the presence of the charming and eligible young Englishman, Frederick Peel, son of the renowned Sir Robert. There is no hotel on the grounds now. The famous dances held in the great ballroom to the music of a 3-piece slave orchestra are remembered only in the diaries of patrons long dead. There is not even much comment in Harrodsburg about the lone grave beside the spring house. She was the girl who danced herself to death, is the usual answer to the inquiring tourist who happens upon the little park. There are many versions of the story of this girl, and at least one narrative of a strange modern aftermath. Some say she came by Kentucky River packet and was driven from the Harrodsburg landing through the impressive lion gate of the grounds in the hotel carryall. Others tell that she came in her own carriage, driven by a slave, who immediately turned his team about and was not seen again. There are no disagreements, however, as to the impression she made in the ballroom that night. Among all the beauties attending, there was no girl so distinctive, so perfect a dancer, so fascinating in manner. Though it was obvious that she was pleased with the attentions of the many gentlemen, though she smiled vivaciously and talked animatedly, there was a pathos in her eyes that enhanced her loveliness. During an intermission between the dances, she strolled on the spacious lawn in the starlight, surrounded by a half-dozen of her most ardent admirers. She stopped beneath the foliage of a widespread locust tree, and suddenly became sad and pensive. "I've been happy here," she said. "If I were to die, I could wish for nothing better than to be buried at this spot." When she and her companions returned to the ballroom, the music of the slave orchestra was gayer and quicker than ever. Dance followed dance, and the girl seemed never to miss a step. Her curls bobbed about her oval face, and her little feet were swift on the shining floor. Suddenly, when the ball was at its merriest, there was a cry. The girl had sunk to the floor. Her features had become still. Her eyes were closed. "She's fainted," said someone. But the noted doctor who knelt at her side looked dazed with surprise, then shook his head sorrowfully. "She is dead," he said. After the guests had returned to their rooms, Dr. Graham, who owned the hotel, and his staff sought to discover who the girl was and whence she came. To their consternation, they found that although she had stopped at the desk ostensibly to sign the register, she had written no name or address therein. Frantically, they questioned the gentleman who had danced with her and the guests who had conversed with her. All agreed that she had been evasive in answering queries about her name and her home. One gentleman said that he understood that she came from Tennessee. Another said that she had spoken of life in New Orleans. Faced with the realization that they could find out nothing about the dead girl, they arranged a funeral service. The gentleman who had walked with her beneath the stars remembered the wish that she had spoken under the locust tree. There her grave was dug by the black musicians who had played for her dancing. All the fashionable guests of the big hotel gathered about it as the nameless corpse was laid to rest. A distinguished prelate said a few solemn words, and then all moved away, believing that the story of the lone grave was completed. So romantic and sad a tale, however, is not likely to come to a decisive end. Years have gone by, and sometimes in their passage strange narratives have plagued the minds of those who have interested themselves in the story of the girl who danced herself to death. Once a late homecomer, taking the shortest way to his front door, followed a path through the park that led him between the spring house and the grave. Near the entrance to the spring house, he thought he saw a beautiful girl in a white ball gown, standing as if waiting for her escort. As he approached, she saw him and advanced toward him, her left hand held out in an appealing gesture. Her lips moved rapidly, and he realized that she was speaking to him earnestly, though he could hear no sound. A memory of the dead girl's story came into his mind, and terror-stricken he raced from the park. Other passers-by have told similar stories, which vary little in their major element. The girl was dressed in white, she was apparently in distress, and she was speaking earnestly. I suppose I would not have come upon this story at all had it not been for the fact that an old friend of mine, now living in retirement in New Orleans, was once an antique dealer and had combed the district around Harrodsburg in the effort to purchase valuable old Kentucky furniture. A few years ago he came into possession of a handsome mahogany and curly maple secretary, which contained piles of old papers considered worthless by a previous owner. He asked me to go over them in the hopes of finding material of historic interest, but I found only one page I treasured, and this was more of psychic than historical value. It read as follows. I write this down for what it is worth, and even at best this is nothing. I am an old lady and almost stone deaf, but my eyes are better than those of most people of my age. Because of my infirmity, I once took a course in lip-reading at the School for the Deaf in Hartford, Connecticut. 3 nights ago I found it difficult to sleep and went for a walk down by the old spring house. As I passed it, I saw a girl in full white evening dress standing beside the entrance. When she saw me, she came quickly toward me and placed her left hand on my right forearm in an appealing gesture. Then she began to speak, and I could not hear her voice. I could read from her lips, however, what she was saying. "I ask your pardon, dear lady, for interrupting your stroll, but I am in great distress. I have of late been subject to strange losses of memory. I left the ball at the hotel a few moments ago, and I cannot recall the way back. I am frightened, too, because it seems that I can remember nothing more, not even my own name." I was touched by the girl's appeal, for she was very beautiful and very pitiful, and I said, "If you'll come home with me, I will try to find your parents for you, my dear. There is no hotel near here, and there has not been a ball in Harrodsburg in a long time." She looked at me strangely and then burst into tears. Turning swiftly, she ran toward the spring house and vanished inside the entrance. I went inside to look for her, but she was not there. This, to the best of my memory and belief, is what happened to me 3 nights ago when I went for a walk about midnight. I do not believe in ghosts, but this was so strange a happenstance that I have decided to make a record of it. The page on which this communication was written was unsigned.